Thank you for coming to today's webinar. This is ScienceHolic's March webinar, which is marine science focused. And our lovely guest today is Emily Kunselman from the University of California at San Diego. So before we get started, I'm just going to introduce you all a little bit about who ScienceHolic is. So we are a youth-run nonprofit that aims to introduce intricate scientific concepts in a manner that is fun and comprehensible to teens. So besides webinars like this, we also have our magazine branch, which we will post periodic editions that are based on a variety of scientific topics. For example, we recently released 2 volumes of a chemistry themed magazine, which was really exciting. And now getting into our webinar, please everyone give a huge welcome to Emily again. Emily, would you mind giving us a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. I am a fifth year PhD student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is a research institution, oceanographic institution connected to UC San Diego. So I'm technically a grad student at UCSD, but I'm at Scripps. I am defending soon, which means I'm finishing soon. So I'm very excited to move on to my next step. I study marine biology, and the lab that I work in studies the microbiome of just about anything. So I have a lot of like cross-cutting disciplines in the lab mates that I work with, which is really exciting. I know it says on here I'm from Michigan, but I moved out to California, and I've been here ever since. So I know we'll get maybe a little bit more into my research later. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. All right, and this is just a reminder to our attendees. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to leave them in the Zoom chat and we'll get to them later on during our live Q&A session of the webinar. All right, so our first couple of questions are academic space. So question number 1, Emily, how did you originally discover your passion for marine biology?
Yeah, so as I said, growing up in Michigan, didn't have like a ton of access to the ocean. And the first time I saw the ocean, I think I was in Florida, and we went snorkeling, and it was just like the most fantastic thing that I'd ever seen. There's colors everywhere, there's fish darting left to right. And I realized in school that biology was becoming my favorite subject. I was just really enjoying all of my science classes, my science teachers, and biology specifically. And one day I learned, probably doing one of those like career placement tests that you get to do sometimes, that marine biology was a field of study that I could do. And so I decided, like, yeah, that's definitely what I want to do. I applied to colleges with that in mind, and it was really reinforced by all of the classes I took.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. What classes did you take in high school that you think really shaped that for you?
In high school,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, I don't remember the exact name, but I think in the environmental systems and environmental biology class, that was one of my favorite classes I think that I took, because in biology we would just study like basic biology stuff. We would look at cells, we would look at all these other processes, but environmental biology, I started to learn more about ecosystems, ecology, so the way to study like different aspects of an environment. You go out to the coral reef, I'm snorkeling, and looking at like how many of each organism are there and what they're possibly doing. That's what I found I really enjoyed.
Yep, sounds great. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Our next question, what was it like studying marine biology in college?
It was amazing. I loved it. There was a big emphasis on both taking classes and starting to get into research. So all of the classes that I took that were in like the marine biology program at UC San Diego were being taught by the researchers at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So they kind of have two jobs. They have their research and then they have teaching and mentoring students. And so I got to ask them about their research and the things that they were teaching, especially later on. A lot of the specialized classes happened more in my third and fourth year. Um, they were teaching us things that they had discovered in their research. So, like the marine biochemistry was being taught by Martin Tresguerres, and he literally studied all of these things in like eels and corals. So that was really, really, really exciting. And then I got to get involved in research and start working in a lab in like my third and fourth year. And so I was able to take marine biology lab classes. So we're like using microscopes, we're studying the physiology of fishes, and then use what I learned there to start working in a lab. And I had like no concept of what it was like to be in a lab and what it was like to actually be a marine biologist. So college was the time where I really started to see how the things that we were learning applied to actual lab settings. Certain things in chemistry actually very important to me still today.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, how did you sort of go about building those relationships with your professors, like building mentor-student relationships?
Yes, that is a very, very good question because I think a lot of people are really kind of lost with that going into college, but there's this like weird external pressure. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, I want to get involved in research. I want to get involved in research. And it can be kind of intimidating at first to approach your teacher. But just remember that they're just researchers, they're passionate about marine biology just as much as you are. So if you have the chance to take advantage of office hours, um, go ask them more about what they do, what they study, what they recommend to somebody like you. And the more you do that, maybe you'll find a professor that you really mesh well with, and it's really easy to talk to them and get along with. And then maybe you start asking them for you to get involved in research. Are there openings in their labs? Are there openings in other labs? Or could you maybe talk to their graduate students or their postdocs? Something that I didn't realize for a while, in a lab, you have the PI, the principal investigator, the head of the lab. They are busy with everything. Like I said, they have so many jobs to do. But then they have postdocs who are PhD students who graduated and are now continuing to do research, but with additional guidance in like a slightly different lab. And then, of course, you have all the graduate students, people who are pursuing PhDs and masters. And I think they are actually a really good source of mentorship. So if you can get placed with one of them to teach you things, then you have somebody who has a lot more time and space for you, but then you still have direct access to the principal investigator of the lab. So yeah, that's kind of the best way that I can describe how to start doing that. Just like don't be afraid to meet with tons of different professors and see who you mesh well with, and ask them to speak with their graduate students and postdocs.
hmm Great. Thank you so much for that advice.
Yeah.
All right, so this sort of goes hand in hand, but what is your advice for current high school students who are interested in marine biology or maybe just STEM in general?
Yeah, or just STEM in general. I think um, one of the big things is go to college. That's where you're gonna start to like really learn everything about STEM, where you're gonna see all these different career paths that you can take, and just a great time to meet peers who you might work with later on in life. So think about going to college. It doesn't matter where you go to college. You can go anywhere. You can go to community college. You can go as far away as you want. You can transfer from one college to another during your experience. Like you have a lot of options. Um, but just start thinking about now, I guess, where you might want to be, what's possible for you, what you're comfortable with, and really take those science classes seriously because your high school teachers can also be really important mentors. Find somebody who you really connect with and have them help you, maybe with those college applications. I still have a high school teacher who we follow each other on Instagram and I connect about different things. So just like finding a mentor in college, you want to find a mentor and a high school teacher to get you there. But I also want to stress that you don't have to worry so much. Like if you think you want to maybe do marine biology, or maybe you want to become a doctor, or maybe you're interested in chemistry, you don't have to know any of that right now. It's never too late to get into marine biology, but give your best effort with whatever it is that you are pursuing. Give it a fair chance. And then I think I've given like I guess a lot of examples of things to do when you do get to college. Um, but one of those things with talking to professors, it really has to do with networking. So the more people that you're willing to meet and just talk to, and if you really like them, ask for their contact info, and if they're interested in following up, just like don't be afraid to talk to people. I know it's hard. Everyone is like at a different level of extroverted and introverted, but it's going to be much easier to find your people if you talk to more and more people.
Yeah, I definitely feel like high school is, a place to start practicing that, already starting to
Exactly.
practice that, networking with your teachers. Great, thank you so
Completely agree.
much.
Yeah.
All right, so our next couple of questions are going to be focused on research. So first up, what's the focus of, your current research, your recent research, just all of that?
Yeah. My favorite question to answer, of course, because I'm super passionate about it. So I study what happens to microbes, bacteria, viruses, when the environment changes or when an animal gets infected with a disease. And I study both of them because they're really, really tightly linked. So I have behind me an example of an oyster farm because I study oysters. Oysters and abalone. If you've never heard of them, it's a marine snail. It's found along the coast of California, but a lot of them are very endangered right now. So it's important to understand how diseases affect them. And so, for example, I look at how temperature dictates whether a virus can infect an oyster or not. And then I look at how the rest of the bacteria in the community respond to that change. I kind of like to think about this as like baking a cake in two different regards. So, one, when you're making a cake, maybe you want to make a lemon cake or a strawberry cake or a chocolate cake. It's really easy to interchange those ingredients like lemon, vanilla, chocolate. But if you add too much salt to a cake, it's not a cake anymore. It's not going to taste good. So I think about that in terms of the environment. If I add a stressor, too much salt, too high of temperature, it might mess things up for the oyster and for the bacteria that live inside it because the bacteria can be very important. They can actually help the oyster prevent infection and digest their food. So that's one of my favorite ways to think about it. So that's what I've been studying now, but it started when I was an undergraduate. I got to work in an internship on a project where they were studying the impact of um, seagrasses on oyster growth. So this is why chemistry is important because the eelgrass photosynthesize, so they change the chemistry of the water, they change the pH. And oysters have calcium carbonate shells. If the water is too acidic, they can't create those shells because they're pulling these things out of the water and it will dissolve if it's too acidic. So they were studying if the eelgrass could actually help the oyster grow. And then I got really, really interested in oysters and I just kept going and I learned about the microbiome and I fused them together. And that's how I got myself to where I am today.
Great. Do you actually like go down like to the ocean and like collect samples and things like that?
Yes, I do. I spent a lot of time during this PhD going down to San Diego Bay with a painter's tool and a mallet and like hitting oysters off of rocks so that we could take samples of their tissue and see what bacteria were actually living inside of them.
Yeah. How often is that you actually like go out and like collect things for
It
specific
depends.
research?
Yeah, so I've helped other people with projects and I've done my own. I would say I've done 1 year, we did four season sampling events and we went out 3 times each season. So we went out 12 times over the course of a year, and each time we spent a few hours collecting oysters. And then other times I have actually put equipment in the field to collect larval oysters. So oysters start out as little larvae floating through the water. It's like gelatinous. And then they settle on a rock and actually start to grow their shell. And so I was able to capture them on a tile and bring them back to the lab. So that one was more like I went out and I deployed the tiles and I waited for 3 months and then I went and I collected them again. So those are just some examples.
Hmm. Love it. That sounds super, super fun and interesting. Yeah. Hmm.
Loved it.
Yeah. All right. So next up, what does a day in the lab look like for you?
Yeah, so if I'm not out in the field collecting
Mm,
oysters,
yeah.
which really is a smaller margin of my time, if I'm in the lab, usually what I'm doing is following a protocol and seeing if I can get to work and if I get the results that I want. So, for example, we collect those oysters, we go back to the lab, and we shuck them. So oysters have this really strong muscle that holds the shells together. You cut that open and then you dissect the specific tissues. Like oysters have gills, oysters have a stomach. So we're in the lab dissecting those and putting them into tubes that preserve the DNA of the sample. And then the next day I might come in and try to actually extract the DNA. I don't know if any of you have done that science experiment. I did it in high school. We like extracted strawberry DNA. It was really fun. So it's somewhat similar to that, so that I can sequence the DNA, meaning I can read the ATCs and Gs of whatever that DNA was. And that I usually send off. So I actually process my samples and then I send them to a facility that sequences them, and then they send me the data back. So a lot of my days are actually going through that data and taking it from just these ATCs and Gs to identifying what bacteria were in the oyster and looking at how like one oyster varies from another one. And that really requires a lot of running code, which is really exciting and really frustrating sometimes. It's like the most rewarding experience, because a lot of it is just like error, error, error. And then I'll take that code, and usually at the end I produce some sort of plot or figure. So there may be dots on a plot that show like this sample is very similar to this sample but very different from another one. And then what I have to do is, after I spend a ton of time trying to curate those results, I write about it and I read other scientific literature. Reading is really, really important. um, I see what people have already studied and if my results are similar or different to theirs. And then if I have a new result, so usually in science, you're trying to find the gaps of research. So I'll do a project that looks at how temperature affects the virus, um, for a new type of virus. So I know that a virus works in one way in one environment. How does that actually work in a different environment? I'll compare my results to theirs and then I'll try to explain why I got the result. So reading, writing, coding, following protocols in the lab with pipettes and whatnot. That's how I spend a lot of my time.
Hmm. Yeah.
And each day is different.
Oh, yeah. Hmm. Got it. And yeah, since you mentioned coding, like how much of your work would you say like sort of integrates that sort of computer coding aspect?
So everything I do.
Mm,
And this varies from discipline to discipline, but I think that one thing that's really, really important in biology is statistics. So really pay attention in your statistics classes that you'll probably inevitably take in college if you're going to do anything like ecology or biology. Sometimes you can just run that in Excel, like a really simple t-test comparing two groups. But oftentimes you develop these really complex experimental designs. And so there you really have to understand how to answer the question that you have with the data that you've created. Um, so I code for everything. There's a program called R, and that's the primary statistics kind of software that I use. A lot of it is not necessarily me creating the tool. I'm using a tool that somebody else created, but I have to know how to format my table, how to apply the tool, what parameters to use. Um, yeah, so like testing if two bays had different temperatures, or testing if the diversity of two bacterial communities is different. It all requires coding and statistics.
Yeah, lots of numbers, right?
Lots of numbers, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. All right, so next up, what were some memorable experiences from your time researching?
I have so many. Like it's just a great field to be in. I love research. So I was thinking of a few. One time when I went out for field work with one of my lab mates, we were out all day, checking the oysters, collecting oysters, and we decided that we should get some fried chicken sandwiches and just sit along the water and reflect. So it was just so nice, like the sun was setting. I feel like a lot of these experiences you get to do, you really get to integrate in these like fun social times. Also conferences, scientific conferences are one of my favorite things. I have a best friend who works in my lab with me, and we have gone to conferences together, one in Baltimore and one in Dubai. We went to the UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai, and it was an incredible experience. I also have some really funny, memorable times. Like we had so many oysters that we collected and brought back to the lab that we were in the lab until like midnight. And at that point, you start to go a little stir crazy. So we're like listening to music, we're laughing, we're pretending that the oysters are like animated. It's a good time.
Yeah, I love it. It's sort of like I guess maybe for students' experience is like late night study groups with your friends.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Took that from college and just kept it going in research.
Mhm. Yeah, love that. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so those are all of our pre-prepared questions. And yeah, so now's the time for our attendees. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them in the Zoom chat and we'll answer them for you here. Yeah. So yeah, we'll give just a couple of minutes for anyone to leave any questions, comments for us. Yeah.
Any question, big or small. I'm an open book.
All right, so I got one direct message here. So this attendee wants to know what do you plan on doing moving forward after getting your PhD?
An amazing question. I still right now I'm like split between all these different things that I want to do. One thing that I want to do is go work for the Port of San Diego and kind of be more on the regulatory side of trying to get aquaculture and new technologies running in the Bay of San Diego. I also have applied to postdoc jobs. So, like I said, in a lab, you have grad students and postdocs. And so I could go work in a different lab, research other things. Um, and then another position that I want to do is more involved in extension. So a lot of academic research is very much like, let's answer this kind of fundamental question in science. But I'm very interested in applied science or like use-inspired science where there's a problem out there that needs to be addressed, and I can try to help make that happen and then return those results to the person or the group who needed them. For example, with me, I'm really interested in aquaculture, which is like just like oyster aquaculture. So actually growing and supplementing our food sources instead of just taking things from the wild. And so is a farm in San Diego, and I want to help them with whatever they need. Do they need oysters to grow faster? Do they need oysters to be resistant against a disease? So if I work in extension, I can go to them, ask them what they need, and then assemble a group of researchers to tackle the problem. And then afterwards, I can say, okay, here's our recommendations. Here's how we can help you with this product. And then maybe there's other outreach as well. So like me coming to a group of high school students and letting them know like, hey, this is a potential workforce that you can be in the future. Or yeah, yeah, there's plenty of examples. So I am kind of at this like split where I'm just waiting to see what sticks. I think there's a lot of opportunities after you have a PhD and just even a master's degree as well. There's a lot of opportunities. And the more that you go through these like science programs, the more you're going to learn about.
Yep, sounds great. Thank you. All right. Any other questions from anybody? All right. Let's see. All right. One attendee also wants to know what were some recent developments in marine biology. So I guess they just want to know, like, in general, what's new.
What's going on? Oh my gosh, this is kind of a hard question for me because research is so specific. Like I go into this one little problem. Um, I think that one thing that is, I guess you could say like the cutting edge marine biology research is in the microbiome, actually. So we're just starting to understand how the microbiome is linked to human diseases and other things with humans. And so starting to dive into that with marine animals as well, marine plants. It's like a huge field of like so many things that you can study. So I think the microbiome is one thing. Um, there's also a lot of chemistry labs at Scripps that look at drugs from the sea, which has been going on for a while, but they're always like kind of pivoting and looking for new ways to study that. So, for example, sponges produce these like bioactive compounds that may help with human applications and medicine or, maybe like skincare products. And so they'll look at what is in the sponge, how it's being coded for in their genome, which is a newer development because now we can sequence things for a lot cheaper. We can sequence more, like we have so much data nowadays. Um, so like finding new drugs from the sea. And I think there's a lot of focus on coral reefs right now, because we're trying to figure out how to make them more like temperature resistant because we know that we're having like warming temperatures over those coral reefs and they're bleaching and they're dying. So understanding how resilient they are, can they recover from this, how that changes over time, and can you actually like create artificial reef, or can you breed resistant coral in a lab and put them out on a reef so that the reef does better? So those are just a few examples. Um, I can try to think of more, but it's a huge field, right? So there's so much going on.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we have another question here. What is the most challenging aspect of studying marine biology and how did you overcome it? Are there any more tips that you would like to give for starters?
This is also a good question. One challenge that I faced that I didn't anticipate is funding. So scientists are always applying for grants to fund their research, and that can be really competitive sometimes, like hundreds of PIs are submitting for a specific grant to study something kind of similar, and only one or five of them are going to get it. So I think for me, that like one of the biggest challenges was how do I get enough money to do the research that I want to do? Because things that I do cost money, processing the samples, buying lab reagents, sending samples for sequencing. Um, so the key with funding is all in the writing. Because you're writing these grant applications, you want to convince your reader that your research is the most important and that you know what you're doing, you have the resources to answer the question. So working on your writing, I would say something to just always do. There's never going to be just like one period in your life that you're like, yeah, now I'm going to get good at writing. It's like constant. You can always get better at writing. The more you write, the better you get. Um, Trying to think if there's other challenges that are like everything's, a little bit challenging. Nothing's easy, but that's one of the bigger ones for me. Um, the other challenge is nothing is ever going to go exactly the way that you expect it to go. Nothing's going to be perfect. And even if you think, oh, I've read all of these papers, this is totally how this experiment is going to turn out, sometimes it just doesn't. And you have to figure out how to adapt, how to understand those results in a different context. Um, and designing experiments, especially in the field, are impossible to predict. You never know what's going to happen. Is there going to be a storm? Are there going to be enough oysters to collect? So that's another huge challenge is you have to be ready to problem solve. You have to design your experiments in the simplest way possible to answer your question, meaning like the most controlled way, and nothing is ever controlled. So it's really challenging to give exact answers to questions, I think, because you always have to put limits and controls on your system that makes it mimic real life a little bit less. So I think as scientists, we're always like, well, this is what I found, and this is what it probably means, but it could be totally different in the next person over, the next ecosystem over. So
Mhm.
those are the two biggest challenges, I think, in research.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Any more questions from our attendees? Let's see here. And yeah, Emily, I have a question from myself. I want to know since there's a lot going on with climate change nowadays, and a lot of that affects like marine ecosystems. So, how would you say that just like normal people like us, how can we, sort of do our part and help that?
That's a really awesome question. It's really nice to hear you ask that because I know that you're all thinking about this and you're like, what can I do? What can I do? Um, just do your best. The foods you eat, you can try to support sustainable fisheries. Um, there's a lot of fact sheets and tools online that tell you like, oh, is this a sustainable fish to eat or not? Limit your plastic usage as much as possible. My best friend who's in my lab studies plastics, and so I learn a lot from her. We don't really understand how these plastics impact humans because they get really, really small to what we call microplastics, and that research is still ongoing to see how it actually affects us. So the less that you use plastic, the more that you reuse things, the better. I like it's going to be easier and more difficult to do things based on where you live. So for me, I can go to a farmer's market really easily. I can bring my own bags. I can get like buy local is another thing. I can get local produce and all of that. And that is just way better for the environment. The less that you order, the less that has to travel in a plane or overseas. the better. And if you start finding ways to just very easily modify your lifestyle, then other people will see that and they can take an example from you because they think, oh, that's actually really easy. Like I can do that too. Um, if you have the chance to talk to representatives in the government, tell them like what your concerns are, what the issues you see are. Do you want to see them ban plastic bags? Do you want to see more investment in your local community and local businesses and like get the McDonald's out of there, get get those kind of places out of there. You're not going to be able to solve this crisis on your own. So I think that you just need to do your best, find habits that you can do to reduce your impact globally. And the more that you do that, the more people will like follow your example and do the same thing.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's definitely can be hard, and like a little discouraging when, you're like seeing all these news articles kind of like, oh, like, this is happening and this is happening and oh, look, this is like
Yeah.
our coral reefs now. But yeah, I'm sure I feel like especially like Gen Z nowadays are all like very much aware of these things. So yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully things are gonna change. And yeah, I
I
think
think they
it's
are.
yeah, I think for example, since like I live in New Jersey and now it's changed so that like when you go to the supermarket, you they don't just like hand out plastic bags
Yeah,
anymore. Yeah, you have to like, pay like an extra 50 cents for
exactly.
your bag. So just encourages more like reusable bag usage, which I think is really great. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
uh,
totally agree.
yeah, hopefully we can see more of those changes on bigger scale in the future.
I totally agree. I think minimizing plastics, just minimizing the amount that you add to like the materials that you need in your life. And like I also said, like local, buying local, investing in local, that means you're not shipping things like all over the place. That's just going to be the best thing that you can do for the environment. And I think that mental health these days is really intertwined, especially in Gen Z, with like the future that you see that I'm like on the cusp, the future we see for ourselves. And sometimes it can be really easy to let that get to us. Like, oh, well, the coral reefs are just like going to be ruined. And maybe you see somebody elected that you think isn't is going to like take us back in progress. Don't let this affect your mental health. Um, take it as like this is something I'm passionate about and something that I want to correct, but it's really easy to slip into this like doomsday kind of scenario. Be positive, be uplifting, be like, the solution. Um, and I believe in every single person. Each person has to do their part. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. All right. Well, yeah, I think that's all from our attendees today. I think that's a great note to leave off with. So yeah, that concludes today's webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And of course, a huge thank you to Emily for your time today and sharing your knowledge, your experience, your advice to everyone. So here is ScienceHolic socials. If you're interested in seeing more webinars like this, you can go visit our website where we have recordings of past webinars. And please go follow our Instagram if you're interested in all sorts of STEM content. And yeah, on our Instagram, there's our link tree, which you can find a bunch of stuff on. And one of those is our applications. So if you actually are interested in working with us here at ScienceHolic, there's a lot of ways to do so. We have a lot of different branches such as content, editing, art, website, social media, and I am part of the outreach branch myself. If you want a sort of low commitment way to sort of promote ScienceHolic, you can also join as an ambassador. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff there to explore as well. So yeah, go check that out. After this session. So yeah, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for attending, and once again, thank you, Emily.